Hey, what's going on, Summoners? This is Ian from ballernerd.com. Today's video we're going to show you how to run League of Legends on the best settings for your computer. We're also going to talk about the settings and what each one of these little graphics things does so that you can get the best performance out of your game. So let's hit escape here and go to video. Notice this is after the recent patch with the visual update that looks quite a bit like Dota 2. So let's go to video options here. Hit escape, then go to video options. So you notice a couple things. There's settings for auto, resolution, windowed mode, character quality, environmental quality, effects quality, shadows, wait for vertical sync. Now let's first talk about resolutions. 920 by 1080 is HD television. That is the highest definition we can see right now over cable. That's pretty much the best thing you're going to get. Too much higher than that just basically means that you have a larger screen and it's just scaling the window to a little bit larger screen. Few people are going to have that. 920 by 1080p is the highest you can put your settings to as far as screen resolution. Every screen by default, every computer by default will have a default screen resolution that it can display at. So if you have a laptop, for example, you might not necessarily be at 920 by 1080p unless you have a really good screen. This is determined primarily, resolution is determined primarily by your screen size and what your screen can display rather than your graphics capabilities. So if you're not at 920 by 1080p, that's okay because it's pretty much indistinguishable unless you're right up next to the screen. So don't worry about it too much. Most computer screens will probably be somewhere between the 1280 by 800 to the low 1400 by 900s, possibly a little higher. I've seen a lot of new laptops coming out recently that have been the 1600 by 900. This is simply because in a laptop it's much more expensive to put a really high quality screen in there rather than something that's a little bit lower quality. But the difference is negligible, so don't worry about that too much. Setting a lower stage resolution is also going to improve visual performance, not as much as adjusting some of these other effects that we'll talk about. So typically when you want to adjust settings, having a higher stage resolution is okay. It's not going to affect performance too much. Now we have here windowed mode and full screen mode and borderless. Now depending on your processor, some processors handle window tasks a little bit better than they handle full screen tasks. Being in a windowed or borderless task, you essentially allow yourself the option to tab out much easier than if you could in a full screen setting. I actually find that the game runs much better in a borderless mode, and so that I can tab out really easily or move the screen. For this setting, my best advice is to just play with it and see what runs better on your computer. Now for character quality, this is actually a texture. So by adjusting the textures in the game, you drastically affect the performance of your game, because that is one less thing that your computer has to render. So by setting the character quality to very low or medium, for example, you are allowing your computer to do more processes such as move minions, things like that, without having to smooth over the character models. As you can see, they just updated the character model for Ashe, and she set on very high quality. So all of her textures are very smooth. If I were to lower that, she would the quality would degrade, but it wouldn't. My game performance would improve. My FPS would increase probably over 50 here. Now, environmental detail is much the same. It's a rendered image. Due to this latest patch, they have essentially made pre-rendered images that work much better than the previous pre-rendered images for lower computers. So by putting the environmental detail to low or very low on a computer that was already lagging a little bit when you're playing League is going to actually improve your quality over what it had done previously over the last 2 years or however long the game has been out. You will see a pretty large increase in graphical quality. So it's highly recommended that you switch these settings to low or very low. Very low obviously will net you the largest amount of performance increase for a computer that is slightly older and was already having trouble playing the game. Very high, not too much difference. It's a pre-rendered image, so you won't really see a huge difference other than the just kind of like upgraded beauty of the game that they've added in. Colorblind mode, you don't need to worry about too much. That's just if you're colorblind and you're having trouble seeing the colors. Now for effects quality, these are a little bit different. This is your processor will render these things slightly differently. Medium settings is not going to be too much different than a very low. A very high is going to actually require more processing power, but not too much. Effects quality should not typically put as much strain on your hardware. So you could play with that a little bit. Probably running on medium is a little bit better. There are some advantages to running on medium as opposed to very high. As opposed to running on very high versus running on like a medium setting, it's always safer to run on a medium setting because any sort of hiccup you get could essentially affect your gameplay. That could be that one split second when you lag that causes you to get killed. Now we can talk about shadows. Shadows actually require a great amount of effort from your GPU and CPU. So turning shadows down or turning shadows completely off for most people with lower settings is very recommended. The difference between high, medium, and very high, setting your shadow quality to medium is going to much improve your quality here. You can see that the shadow here is equally as smooth as the character model. It's reflected. So essentially what happens is when you turn the shadows down, it lowers this quality. I'd show it for you, but typically my game crashes when I adjust settings. And having no shadows at all, that's one less thing your processor does not have to process. So for those computers that were struggling a little bit before, turning shadows off is a great idea. Wait for vertical sync. So essentially what happens is when you move your camera like this, there are little streaks that will appear because your computer is processing things, and so you basically see two images and they're split in half. Most people won't encounter problems like this, but actually by disabling this you will improve performance because it's one less thing your computer has to process. But for most high-end to medium computers, it's probably better to leave it on. It's not too much of a tax on your computer, but it'll definitely do this. Now, frame rate cap, you can set your frame rates to be much higher than they typically are. This obviously requires much more work from your computer.
Swiftly now.
Okay. Requires much more work from your computer. Having a high frame rate doesn't necessarily mean you're like, oh, my computer's like really badass. Because the human eye can really only see at about 60 frames per second, and that's only when you're like, on adrenaline and your blood's pumping. So 60 frames per second is good for a high end. You really don't need to go benchmarking or 80 FPS unless you just absolutely want to. For most people, 25 FPS is a good number. By default, if you set it on stable, that's fine too. But that pretty much covers it for our guide. If you've got any questions, comments, or concerns, please post below in our comment section. Make sure to add us on YouTube, like this video, give us a thumbs up, tell us what you think.